Do what you must, but know that this trust with my Father won't be broken. Do as you will, but know I am still.
So, Jonathan, could you bring the music down, please, brother? I mean, he did it like boom. All right. All righty. Who am I going to get up here? Let's see. Well, all right, Isaiah. He was trying real hard back there to blend in. But let's everybody stand, and Isaiah is going to lead us in the blessing after the meal, okay? All right? There you go, sir.
Lord, we come before you today to thank you for the food and drinks that you've given us. We pray that you would help Mr. Bill impart wisdom to us during Midrash. And I pray that as we continue with our everyday lives and do our work and jobs, that we not forget that you are the one who has given us these individual gifts and talents. In your name we pray, amen. Amen.
Thank you, brother. All righty. So, again, bye. We'll see y'all later. All right, bye-bye. Is Nayla here? Oh, all right, and all the other young people under 10, 5 to 9, follow Nayla into the other room over there. Okay? Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. All righty. We'll see you, chillins. That's a southern thing.
Just don't let it won't come off. Just don't let it slide too much like that.
All right. All right. So I want to welcome back everyone who's joining us online. We just had a really great meal. Thanks to all the ladies and gentlemen who were responsible for that. And we got to eat in our new space over here. So, and I just always want to thank Carmen and Nayla and Heather and all the ladies and gentlemen who work and do all the things that are necessary for us to just walk in and grab our meal. So we're just very appreciative. Thank you so much for everybody who's responsible in that. I know we usually start out with a question, and we're going to get that ready. You got that microphone ready? Jonathan, I'm going to go ahead and get on this other microphone, sir. There it is. All right. And Dale, can I ask you a favor? Can you be the holder of the mic? So when we have questions and people want to make comments, do you mind just identifying who's next so I don't have to keep up with that? So if anybody gets out of order, it's all on him, right over there. But I wanted to kind of get this started and share some things, a couple of things that I think are important in this Torah portion. They're related to some of the things that we were talking about, but we didn't have time to get into it. And we can go back and we can cover anything and everything, but I did want to share this with you. And this is, after he's praying, after, where's the pen to this? After Jacob was praying, after he's had this encounter, and so in chapter 33, it says, and Jacob lifted up his eyes, and he looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. And so he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. And he himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. So what I was going to share, and like I said, I'm not going to get into another message per se, but because it's connected to some things we were talking about earlier, Jacob, first of all, he places himself between Esau and his family. But he also puts this family in a particular order. And what we're going to focus on for just a second is that he put Rachel and Joseph at the last. Some translations say hindermost, or at the back. All right, here is the word in Hebrew. Make sure I'm going to tell you the right word. Yes. And it's pronounced Achoroim. Oh, Jonathan, put me on the screen. I'm sorry. I'm writing on the tablet. There you go. All right, so here's the word that is translated when he put Rachel and Joseph at the back. He put them at the Achronim. I'm sorry, I misspelled that. Achronim. So here is the root word. Achar. And what that means is this: something at the last. It's at the very last of something. So here's why I think that's interesting. Because it means last. The word achar. Acharon is a derivative of that word. It can actually mean at the last, or it can mean the west. W-E-S-T. Right, why? Because who went first when they were going through the wilderness? Judah went first, and they were toward the east, right? So Acharon, west, alludes to those who are at the other side, all right? So see if you can put this together. Joseph is at the back. He's at the rear. He's at the last. And using a term that means last or toward the west, okay? We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit in the chronology of things, but later on when Joseph is in Egypt and his brothers come and appear before him, he does not appear to them to be one of them, right? He looks like something else. He looks like an Egyptian, right? All right? So, and again, I don't want to get too far ahead of that, into that. We'll talk about that when the Torah portion comes. But Joseph is emblematic of the Messiah in the sense that the Messiah is concealed from his brethren by and large at the moment, but there will come a time when he is revealed to them and everything comes to fruition. But I'm also going to suggest that Joseph is not just emblematic of the Messiah, but he can be emblematic of the body of the Messiah too. And consider that Joseph wore a multicolored coat, symbolizing the body is all kindreds, all tongues, all these different peoples. And then this aspect of things. As his children are marching toward Esau, who's going to be the last one of his children to encounter Esau? Joseph. And what does Joseph look like? What does he represent? What is he speaking of? Not just the Messiah, but, if you will, the body of the Messiah. And I would even be more specific, the body of the Messiah in a particular direction, west. All right? So for decades, centuries, the people, that the world identifies as Israel have been contending for the land right there where everything happened. And for so long, mainstream Christianity has looked at that issue over there as being between Jews and Palestinians, or Jews and Arabs, or Israel and this and what have you. But what we hopefully are coming to understand is that God's people Israel are a people of faith. All right? And so we are beginning to understand who we are and what it truly means to be in Messiah. We are awakening to the fact that because we are in Messiah, we're part of this family Israel. Right? Okay. Well, as we realize it, guess who else realizes it? Esau. Okay. We read earlier in Psalm 83 how your enemies raise their head against you. They're making a tumult. They conspire against your people and against your Zephonecha, against your sheltered ones, your treasured ones. I think some translations render it that way. Hidden ones. Zephonecha. The root is Safan. Here, let's go to this here real quick. No, this Resh Nun Yud Mem. I kind of squeezed it in because I had left the nun out. Sorry. Yeah, it would be Aleph, Chet, Resh, Nun, Yud, Mem. All right, so my thing's on small, obviously. But here is the root word from which we get Zephanecha. Zephanecha. And Zaphon, if you look it up, it will mean hidden, concealed. It can even be alluding to the north. But here's why I wanted to bring it out. When Joseph is called out of prison and he appears before Pharaoh and he tells him what he dreamt and what the dream meant, etc. And you remember Pharaoh says, there's none wiser, more discreet, and full of the Spirit of God than this man. And he gives him a ring, and he gives him a wife, and he gives him all these other things, and he gives him a new name. And he called him Zaphnath Paneach. And Zaphnath comes from this root word Zaphon. So in terms of he being the seed of Abraham, would it be fair to say that he was concealed, hidden, sheltered, those kinds of things? All right? And why? Because there was going to rise an environment that was going to threaten the very existence of Israel. So what did he do? He divided them. He split them up. He scattered them in the sense that Joseph was sent down into Egypt. He concealed, he hid, and at the time of his choosing, he brought them back together so that all Israel might be saved. All right? So bringing it back to the fact that Joseph, among the children of Jacob, are at the very last, they're the last ones to really encounter Esau. And remember what Esau wants to do, where all of Jacob is concerned, where all of Israel is concerned. He wants to destroy them. So I guess what I'm trying to very, very concisely, very briefly bring to your attention is that the reason maybe you and I, and I'm speaking in collective terms here, are being awakened to the threat that Esau is to us is because it's happening as you and I collectively are awakening to the fact of who we are and what it truly means to be in Messiah. Because by and large, I think it's fair to say that for a lot of us to consider ourselves as part of Israel because we're grafted in was kind of a revelation for many people. Because a lot of us were raised to think, well, their church is over here and Israel is over here, and that's why they have a certain set of rules that we don't have to abide by because we're under grace and they're under that. And then all of a sudden we realize that in Messiah, no, we were grafted into and become part of this family. And as we're growing in that and hopefully conducting our lives in accordance with that, guess what? That spirit that is Esau is going to rise up against it. And so we're going to be some of the last to it. Esau is a personality, it's a lifestyle, it's a mindset, it's a spirit, if you want to use that term, that is carnal, it's earthy, it's going back to the man Esau, well acquainted with blood, hates Jacob, hates Israel, wants to satisfy his appetites, will give away what's holy for things that are common. You know, he gave away the birthright. Why? Because he had no regard for it. He disdained it. And so it was no more to him than a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. So it's that way of thinking. If I were going to relate it to today's world, I think there is a generation that is all about, I want what I want. I don't care about anything that's been considered sacred before or things that my father or grandfather revered or fought for or died for. I want what I want. I want it now, and I'm willing to give all those things away if you'll give me what I want. Right. So that's a very broad definition. But I think it is a mindset, it is a spirit, and it is now, I believe, manifesting itself in the earth. Well, for instance, just one example, in my mind anyway, this makes sense. Did you hear about what happened in the UK as far as their elections? Okay? All right, so you've had this man, his name's Jeremy Corbyn, who's been leading the Labour Party in the UK, He's very anti-Semitic. He's very pro-Palestinian, very pro idea of Israel or a bunch of squatters. They're a bunch of imposters and very much anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, if you want to use that term. And he's considered to be a very progressive man in the Labor Party in Britain. All right. Well, they had an election the last couple of days, and the Labor Party got decimated. Yay. Yeah, I agree. You would be more in tune with that than we would, probably. But she's from Canada. So from A to Z, right? But the Labor Party was decimated in this last election. All right, so here is how Esau responded. He took to the streets, started burning things down, started breaking things, started blocking traffic, just creating chaos and havoc. Why? Because he didn't get his way. All right? Now, that to me is a precursor, perhaps, of what we've got to look forward to in this country. Let's just say that the progressives in this country don't get their way in the next election. Then what are they going to do? I'll go out on a limb, and I'll say they're going to pitch a hissy fit. All right? Right. They're going to pitch a hissy fit. Why? Because they want what they want, and they will try to stamp out what you believe and what you consider to be right because they want what they want. Are you following me? So in my mind, that's Esau. Okay, and if you'll pay close attention, you'll see that groups like Antifa and Code Pink and the Freedom from Religion Foundation and some of these groups that are very active here in the States are also very anti-Israel. They're part of this whole BDS movement that's boycotting Israel, and they're very, they're socialism, they're communism, they're Marxists in their views, and they align themselves with Hezbollah, Hamas, some of these quote-unquote pro-Palestinian groups. And so what's the common denominator there? They hate Jacob. Okay, so it goes beyond politics. That's not the point. It is a mindset. It is a spirit, and it's very active in our world today. So Joseph, those who are outside of the land, those who, yes, we're the seed of Abraham, but we, for the most part, don't appear to be the seed of Abraham to our brothers. We're, according to the pattern here, we're some of the last to encounter Esau. So go read Obadiah. It's a prophecy against Edom. And it says the house of Edom is going to be stubble and hay, and the house of Judah is going to be a flame and a fire. All right? It also throws Joseph into that. It talks about how Joseph is going to be at odds with Esau. And this is very, very prevalent in rabbinic commentary as well. So it's not just, Bill making fluff up here. Let me read this passage here in Psalm 102. And again, I'm trying not to get into another lesson. I just thought this was very interesting. And maybe this will prompt a little more discussion. But in Psalm 102, verse 16, when the Lord shall build up Zion, he shall appear in his glory. He will regard the prayer of the destitute and not despise their prayer. This shall be written for the generation to come. And that term, generation to come, is the Hebrew acharon. Acharon is another derivative of the word that we were just talking about that means last or at the back, or it can even mean west. So this shall be written for the generation to come should be understood to mean for the last generation, for the one at the end, and the people which shall be created shall praise the Lord. So, since I referred to this, let me read to you from Obadiah, which is one chapter. And Obadiah, the entire book, is about when God gets ready to deal with Edom or Esau. But it says this in verse 18, the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. They shall burn them and consume them, and there shall be no survivor for the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. So there is prophecy that says that there's going to come a time, there's going to be this climactic battle, and Esau is the one who is going to be dealt with. And you're going to see the house of Judah and the house of Joseph coming together to accomplish this. So I guess I am going to get into this a little more than I thought. Joseph is a picture of the Messiah, but Joseph is also a picture of the body Messiah. Joseph and Judah being reconciled is a picture of what? Those two becoming one. What does Ezekiel 37 have to say? All right. How does Joseph look? How does he appear to Judah? Looks like an Egyptian. He talks like an Egyptian. He walks like an Egyptian. You know, he's the Egyptian. They don't recognize him. But he recognizes them immediately. Right? So there is this reconciliation that comes, and apparently it comes in the time when Esau is threatening Jacob's existence. So, all right, so that leads me to this, and this is something we need to be aware of, and I'll pause and we can just open it up for discussion. But in Genesis 33, verse 4, so Jacob's bowed himself 7 times before Esau. These gifts have preceded him. All these family members are with him. And it says in verse 4, but Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. So they go to hugging one another and kissing one another, and Esau goes to kiss him on his neck. Now, how many of you have ever heard that in Hebrew, this term, and he kissed him, that in Hebrew there's these little dots. There's these little points that the scribes included in there because they were calling attention to this particular word. And it's kind of a long one, but I'll write it out for you. Oop, nope, that's wrong. I don't have this one memorized, so I'm having to look here. All right, so this is actually a vav here that looks more like a nun. Yeah, so it's vav, yud, shin, kuf, he, and then the vav. And the pronunciation is vayish, vayishakehu. Vayish, no. Vayishakehu. All right? So these are the main letters right here. That's translated, and he kissed him. So the root can mean to kiss. It can mean to prepare. It can also mean to arm oneself. And it's thematically it's related to this word. I'm going to have to write small. All right, that's a chaf sofit there. This is a nun here. And that's pronounced nashach. And that word means to bite. So there is a belief out there in Judaism that when Esau kissed Jacob, there was something in that kiss that told Jacob that Esau has not gotten over his anger. All right? Now, later on in the conversation, and Esau said, well, who are all these? Who do these belong to? Well, these are all my children. This is mine. God has blessed us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Esau says, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, well, I'll tell you what, let's go to my house. Let's go to Mount Seir. Now, they've just reconciled after 20 years apart. They've just embraced and kissed. And so he says, let's go to my house. And then Jacob says, nah. You know, we've been on the road a long time, and the kids are tired and worn out. We got all these sheep bleating and all this kind of stuff. It's just not a good time, you know. And he says, okay, well, if you're not going to go to my house, let me leave some of my guys with you. Jacob says, nah, let's don't do that. I mean, what would the point be? And it leaves it at that. And it never discusses whether or not Esau did, in fact, leave guys, here's the way I'll put it, tares amongst the wheat, or he didn't. It never In fact, Jacob says, again paraphrasing, let us rest up a little while. We'll come see you at Thanksgiving. And there's no record that Jacob ever went to Mount Seir. All right, so here's the question. Why? Didn't trust him. Why didn't he trust him? So some people believe and write that when he kissed him, there was something in that kiss that said, he's not loving on me right now, but, sincerely. All right, so there was someone else that when he was walking into a garden, there was a guy that went up and hailed him as master and then what? Kissed him. And that was the sign that this is the guy you want to get. All right? So there's this common thread, I think, with the kiss that Judas gave to the Messiah and the kiss that Esau gives to Jacob, whereby Jacob says, no, you go on your way. We're going to go over this way. All right? So, and there was one other thing that this is not Bible. This is Bill. All right? When you think of somebody biting someone on the neck, what's the first thing that pops in your mind? All right? Blood. Blood. They're taking the life from someone. What is his description, and what do we see about him in Ezekiel in 35 and 36? That he's pursued blood. That's a passion of his. He pursues blood. All right? I'm not saying Esau's a vampire. That's not what I'm getting at. But according to the legend, do vampires come out during the day or at night? They work at night, right? Okay. Esau is acquainted with things that are carnal, things that are earthy, things that operate under the cover of darkness. Remember, he's a skillful hunter. He knows how to set a snare, how to set a trap. All right? So now, one last point, and I'll hush for a little while. In the last, decade, there was books and movies that came out. Twilight. What was it about? And if I understand correctly, it was really from a young person's point of view, glorifying all that kind of. But what is twilight? It's evening. Right? It's evening when light is mingling with darkness, day is mixing with night. So if you're tracking with me, what I'm trying to say is that I don't believe in, Bela Lugosi and all that kind of stuff and blah, blah. That's not what I'm saying. But there are those in this world that they'll pretend to be something they're not. They'll pose as something good. They'll embrace you and they'll plant a kiss on your neck, but if you're not paying attention, you'll never pick up on that. That kiss was actually an indication I've marked you for destruction. You understand what I'm trying to say here? The culture wants to embrace us or feign embracing us. They want to coexist with us, so they say. But really what they want to do is to lure us into that snare. I am convinced that Esau was setting another snare. Let's go to my house. Let's get out of earshot of Dad. Let's get out of this. No. Well, then let me leave some of my guys with you. Why? Anyway, so it's not just history here. There's a pattern here. And it's a pattern that replays again and again and again and again. And you and I, if you'll allow me to put it this way, Joseph, we're some of the last to have to encounter Esau. In fact, that's why Obadiah and other prophecies talk about how Joseph factors so prominently into this last day battle with Esau. All right, I'll pause there. Anybody wants to jump in? Robert?
Okay, you can beat me later, but I just have to comment on your reference. I just have to comment on your reference to Twilight.
Yeah.
Because I worked a lot with juveniles, and so I actually heard a lot of stories about that because this is how they were trying to justify some of the stuff they were doing in their life and how they were making decisions.
Yeah.
But this is the part I find interesting. In that storyline, they depict their nocturnal preference, not because the light was a danger to them, but because it would reveal them, they would glisten, and it would reveal them as the shining ones.
Ooh. Interesting. It's almost like somebody is influencing people to write things. Wow. Yeah, now, you may think I'm crazy, but I honestly believe that the Father will go to great lengths to speak to us if we're paying attention. I personally believe that sometimes there are movies that I've watched and I'm like, whoa. It's almost like he's trying to speak to us through this movie. I didn't know that because I didn't see the movies. I just heard a little bit about it, but that's very interesting. Right. Well, I know you didn't go see it. I know. All right. Anyone else? You've got something you want to share or ask? Anyone? Really? Jenna? Bethany?
Real
I'm sorry.
quick.
Hold on, Jenna. I'm sorry. Really,
No,
really
no.
important thing going on here. Do you love me? All right. If you don't mind. Thank you. Now, I make her coffee at home in the mornings. Okay. All right. Just saying. All right. All right. I'm sorry, Jenna.
Is Edom the Catholic Church? Edom
Say again?
is the Catholic Church Edom historically?
You know, all right, is the Catholic Church Edom? Judaism believes that Edom is, it exists in Rome, you know, even starting with the Roman Empire, all right? And then, of course, evolved over the ages into, you know, the Holy Roman Empire and then the Roman Catholic Church and things like that. I'm not prepared to say in just a blanket statement, yes, all right? Can I find those attributes and characteristics? Yes. Can I find those characteristics and attributes in the Western world outside of the Catholic Church? Yes, I can. I can find them a lot of places. But it is, the idea is embraced, I think, pretty wholeheartedly in Judaism, at least for the most part, that the West, the Western world, and specifically, you know, in the church, you know, particularly the Catholic Church, they see that as Edom. Because from their point of view, that is what has attacked them. That's what was behind, you know, the Inquisition. That's what was behind a lot of the persecution that they had to endure. And so they would see that as being under the heel of Edom. And to an extent, I wouldn't disagree. It's just I wouldn't limit it to that. Does that make sense? By the way, the present exile, because all of Israel's not in the land yet, right? Messiah's not ruling and reigning from Jerusalem yet, right? All right. So the present exile, and that word in Hebrew is galut. Galut means exile. The present exile is called Galut Edom. The exile of Edom. In other words, Judaism believes that right now, Israel is still in exile and under the heel of Edom or Esau. And this goes back to that idea that they see the Western world at large, but more specifically, they see the Roman Catholic Church, again, because of the Inquisition and, you know, many other pogroms and persecutions that were religious in nature. They, you know, it would be, understandably, it would be easy for them to identify that as Esau because that's what Esau does. That's what he does to Israel. He attacks. He tries to destroy. But did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
But the thing the Pope is doing, like trying to put all the religions together.
Wait a minute. Got to get the microphone. I'm sorry. Everybody wants to hear what you're saying.
The thing that the Pope is doing is trying to get all the religions together. Are they suspicious of that, or are they just embracing that?
Who's suspicious of that?
Israel? Do they find that
I
as a
hope
biting
so.
on the neck?
I don't know. I don't have any way to know that. Look, there's part of the. There's Israel. There's God's Israel, and then there's this political entity that's called Israel. And I'm not saying that doesn't factor into God's Israel. Okay, mind you. but it doesn't necessarily think and operate and function in the way that God's Israel is supposed to operate and function. Okay? So in Israel today, and it's been this way since 1948, they've always wanted to be part of the family of nations. They've always wanted to be part of the United Nations, which is amazing to me because the United Nations has been, one of the greatest antagonists to the state of Israel from the very get-go, and yet they want to be part of the United Nations. It's like, why do you want to be part of something that wishes to destroy you? I don't understand that, okay? But at the same time, there are those in Israel, I'm sure, that are very, very much aware of the fact that these nations out there want to destroy us. They've got to be aware that there are people in religious circles, the Pope, who aren't their best friends when they're going and making overtures to the Islamic world and to this enemy and to that enemy. So they're not stupid either, How they maneuver that politically, I don't know. I'm not a politician. But, yeah, there are people in the Catholic Church. There are people in the Protestant Church. There are people in the Western world that seek Israel's destruction, I wouldn't go so far as to say every Catholic feels that way. I wouldn't even go so far as to say as every Muslim feels that way. But the powers that be, those that set the direction for those institutions and those peoples and those nations, it's like and I'm rambling here, but in the Gaza Strip, there's a lot of people that live in the Gaza Strip that they just want to raise a family. They want to make a living. They want to see their children grow up. They want to see their grandchildren grow up. But yet, they elected Hamas to lead them. And Hamas has determined they're going to destroy Israel. So unfortunately, you have all these people that either feel they must just to survive, or they feel that this is the way to go. They go along with these things that people do. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is there are people in the Protestant church that will listen to those voices that say that Israel, God's done with Israel, and we're going to be pro this and pro that and anti-Israel. And there will be people in the Catholic Church that will do the same thing and follow the leading of the Pope, So anyway, I feel like I'm rambling, but I hope I in some way addressed your question. All right. Dale, I have no idea who is next, brother. All right.
Okay, this was a good lesson today. But I know we left out Dina.
Yeah.
We left Dina out of the teaching, and I think that's a really important aspect because there's a lot of, I'm going to choose my words carefully here. There are a lot of children that are exposed to that kind of stuff that Dina was exposed to.
Okay.
Is that delicate enough?
I understand what you're saying.
And, the thing that with Jacob that amazes me about him is that he was more worried about what others thought than his daughter's honor.
Yeah.
And it was her brothers that sought her honor. I think that says a lot about the heart of Jacob, or Israel, because he was Israel at the time, and where he was at. That was my comment on that. And now my other comment is something different. I want to say I'm very grateful to be home.
Well, we're glad you're home.
I am so grateful. If I could have gotten on my floor and kissed it, I would have kissed it. I was so glad to be home. And it took what I went through to make me realize that this is my home, this is my church, this is my family. And that, like your lesson, Jacob and Esau didn't see each other for 20 years. That was 20 years between my brother and I. A lot had happened. A lot had changed. That was not good. And it took the Jacob-Esau connection to make me realize, is it hot?
I'm sorry.
I just looked up and I saw his face. It took the Esau-Jacob connection in my life to make me appreciate what I have here. All I could deal with when I first came to Jacob's tent was the pain and the hurt that I was feeling. And I wanted to distance myself from that pain, that hurt. And I just wanted to go away as far as I could because I just couldn't. The pain was just that great. And when I got there, the second day I was there, I applied for housing. And suddenly God began to close doors. He just began to close these doors. And because he did that in such, it was a fire I was going through. And I know people have been telling me that we prayed for you. I prayed for you while you were gone. I thank you for your prayers because your prayers kept me safe. There was one point my life was in danger, literally. And God didn't let a spirit of fear come on me. And he kept me through it. And he brought me to another place where spiritually I was in danger. And so I began to see I don't belong here. I do not belong here. What I have is what I need is in Cleveland, Tennessee, is at Jacob's tent, is with my real family. Y'all are my family, all of you. And I love all of you, and I don't know all of you right now, but I want to get to know you. I am so grateful to be here. I swear I would get down on that floor if I could get back up and kiss it.
We believe you. You don't have to do that.
I love it here, and thank you for taking me. And I kept telling you before I left, I can't trust you. Remember? Mm-hmm. It wasn't that I couldn't. I was afraid to trust. And I don't feel that way now. I know this is where I belong, so this is my home. Thank you.
Well, we are glad that you are here, and we are glad that you feel that this is a safe place for you. And we're glad that you're here. We thank God for you. As to your comment on Isaac, I don't get it either. I won't pretend to understand that. I'm sorry, Jacob. In as far as the Dina situation, so.
When I was going through that kind of stuff, he wasn't there to protect me, and he knew it was going on, but he didn't protect me or my brothers and sisters. And when I look at Jacob, I'm kind of like a real disappointment in him over this fact.
Well, what I was going to say in addition, sometimes, there are things that are written and we may not have all of the facts, and we may not have all of the details and things. And I have wondered, and I'm not going to be dogmatic about this, but I have wondered if it wasn't so much that they were trying to defend her honor as much as it was how they went about doing that. Luring these guys in, with basically something that they never intended to follow up on, and that is, if you want to be like one of us, you want to be part of the family, and you got to get circumcised. Well, they were, that's what they were waiting for them to be in pain and sore and not being real mobile, and they had set their own snare, they had set their own trap. So I have wondered, and again, I'm not going to be dogmatic about this, but I have wondered if Jacob's issue with Simeon and Levi was not so much that they went to defend their sister's honor, but they may have done so in a dishonorable way. Okay? So again, I'll leave that for debate and and discussion, but there may be some things that we don't understand fully. Maybe there's some information that we just don't know. But I agree, on the surface at the very least, it's like, what are you thinking, dude? This is your daughter, Because the typical reaction of a man, if somebody found out he did something to his daughter, all I have to do is look at all the fathers' faces right now and to know what their first reaction would be. So I don't know. That's something that we'll probably be discussing into the kingdom. Nate had his hand up, Dale. Oh, he's got the mic. All right, very good.
Check. All right. So a couple of things that when we were talking about the spirit of Esau and all that, and the Catholic Church and all that, one of the things that's really been on my mind lately is that Judas was right next to Mashiach. Mm-hmm. And like we were talking about a few weeks ago, the enemy has always got something over here on the left trying to get our attention when we're not recognizing what's going on right as they're standing right next to us. So I've been trying to pray against any kind of spirit of Esau that might be rising up in myself towards my brothers and being an accuser or any of that stuff. So let's just keep our minds open that, let's focus on being wheat and not tares, and not looking at Esau out there and really focusing on what's going on in our own heart and our mind. Not that we shouldn't, but that was another thing. The second thing I wanted to bring up is in the military, when we're training, the enemy always attacks during twilight. That's the best time to strike, because the light it's harder to see with your night vision goggles and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So, and that's the time when we were taught you need to be the most vigilant, because that's when the enemy tends to strike. And then the third thing was, I was thinking about as Israel starts to recognize who they are, then you said Esau starts to see that as well, and then they start to oppose or come for that blood. That in John chapter 9, Yeshua was talking about he had to do the works that he had to at that point in time, because there will come a time where no man can work. And it made me think about, as the twilight starts to shift, then Esau is going to rise up and take to the streets. And it's just a speculative thought process that there may come a time. I know for me, even in the medical field, there's going to come a time, and I'm preparing for it, that I'm not going to be able to work there anymore. It's just not going to be possible, because where I stand as part of the nation of Israel does not can't coexist. So those three things were on my brain while you were talking.
Well, I agree. I mean, that's what we're moving toward. That's when the adversary is. That's when darkness overtakes the world. But at the same time, that's when his glory is seen upon us. But we have to make those decisions. We have to prepare now to make those decisions that, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to coexist with that. Here's something else that while you were talking that this popped into my head, and just take it for what it's worth. But it has to do with, you're talking about Judas being right up there next to Mashiach while all this other stuff is going on. Some of you may already know this, but maybe some of you don't. That Iscariot was not his last name. Okay? Iscariot is actually a transliteration from Hebrew. I'm going to write it first in Hebrew. Okay? Hebrew class, can you make that out? Ish Kariot. Ish Kariot. It's actually two words. Now, you probably know the word for what Ish is, a man, okay? But Kariot. Cities. He's a man of the cities. He's a man of the city, if you will. All right? That's what it literally means. Now, why do I find that of interest? Look at what goes on in cities. Okay? On record, who's the first city builder? Cain. Cain. Now, why did Cain build a city when the Creator had just banished him to be a wanderer and a nomad? Okay? But if you're a wanderer and a nomad, what do? You travel from place to place to place to place to place. But when you build a city, what does that signify? Staying put. Okay? So what was Cain? He was a rebel. Okay? And he was a city builder. All right? So the next one on record is who? Nimrod. What was he? He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. He was a mighty hunter, lifnei, in the face of Yud-Heh-Vav. So the early city builders were rebels. All right, so Ish Koriot is a transliteration, Iscariot is a transliteration of Ish Koriot, which Judas was a man of the city. All right, now let's go with this thought for just a moment. Does anybody know what the Greek term for city or cities is? Thank you, polis. Polis. Decapolis, Metropolis, Indianapolis, Minneapolis, polis. It means city. It's related to things of this city. From that word, we get this word. All right, now, think about what I'm saying here. Esau's really good at what he does, right? He's really good at what he does. Think about Judas for just a minute. A woman comes in. She has an expensive box with this expensive oil. She's got this alabaster box, and she breaks it open, and she pours it on Yeshua's feet. And who gets all uptight about it? Judas. Look at what she's doing. This expensive ointment could have been sold and the proceeds been given to the poor. Now, you remember that exchange? And you says, well, what's your problem, pal? Number one, she's preparing me for my burial. Number two, the poor you're always going to have with you. All right? But John, I think it's John that says, words to this effect, he wasn't concerned about the poor. He was just feigning caring for the poor, or the consideration for the poor, because he had the purse. And he had been sticking his hand in the purse. So think about what I'm saying. It's a man of the cities who feigns consideration and care of the poor, but really is just using that as an excuse to feed his own, whatever it is, greed, power, all these kinds of things. So I just find it interesting that you related, what Judas was doing to the function of Esau, kind of in the midst of what the Father is doing. And just as a sidebar, Yeshua was not taken by surprise in that. He had said, everyone you've given me, I hold on to them, and one of them's even a devil. So he was not unaware of that. But the point, again, that when you said that, the function of Esau being in the midst of what the Almighty is doing, and then he is a man of the city, think about some of the stuff that we're having to deal with. It's forcing you and others to start thinking ahead that soon it's going to be where I can't work. Soon it's going to be where I can't coexist with this. I'm going to have to step out of it. Who are making those kinds of decisions? It's people who set policy. In other words, that's derived or related to this. So there's no accidents, y'all. I mean, it's not just coincidental. There are things that are in the Scripture that if we're paying attention and we see the patterns, we can see not only what the Father's doing, but we can see what the adversary's doing. And when we see where this is going, then it should, anyway, I hope, help us to know what we need to do today to prepare for what he wants us to be tomorrow. All right? Who is next? Yes, Dana.
So the scripture that I was thinking of today a lot as you were teaching is Matthew 11, verse...
I'm sorry, pause just a moment. I'm sorry. Are you guys headed out? Yeah. Blessings, safe journey, okay? Thanks. All righty. I'm sorry, Dana.
So the scripture I was thinking of a lot is Matthew 11:12, where it says, "And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force." And even as I looked up that word take, it's harpazo in the Greek, which means to snatch or to grab, to not let go of it. And so I was thinking about how that's how Jacob had to fight by grabbing a hold of the father so tightly that he wouldn't let go. And so then I was just thinking through, I don't know, I just started doing this study on Melchizedek and how he's a king and a priest, and just the authority that we have to lift up prayers, but also to speak the word. And so in all of this, I'm just thinking about these last days and how, what will we do? It's that we walk in such an authority that literally we declare what he says, and it happens. Like, it's just amazing to me that we don't have to, our weapons are not carnal but mighty for the pulling down of strongholds, that this is how we get to fight in these last days. And I'm not saying there's not going to be bloody battles too, but I'm just so grateful even for the example of Jacob and how he wrestled with the father, that this is how we can wrestle and this is how we can fight through the word, through prayer, and just knowing who we are in him. So those were my thoughts.
Well, I just want to tag on to that. Okay, the Greek is harpazo. But there's the Hebrew equivalent, paratz. We talked about this last week. It means to break out. So even though Jacob's grabbing hold and he's wrestling with the Almighty, you know, when he gets that name, when that is conferred upon him, when that function is conferred upon him, you're not going to be the one being trampled on. You're going to be the one that tramples on scorpions and serpents. You're going to be the one who has power over all of the enemy, so that, you know, none of these things are going to hurt you. But that also, implied in that is, in the trampling down, well, that's, you're moving, you're walking, you're stepping. If I may, you're marching, you're breaking out. When I was a kid, I was 7 years old. My dad, you know, the guy that drove me to the fight. By the way, on the screen, there is a question from the online group. And the question, the burning question today is, could you give us the results of your fight? All of the things I talked about today, and that's the burning question. And I was asked that several times at ONIG. All right, so really quick, the end result was this. We went out to the oak tree. He popped me in the mouth. It made me mad. I popped him in the nose. He popped me in the other side of my mouth. I hit him in the eye, and he stuck out his hand. We shook hands and went back into the gym. And we were friends after that. He had a black eye. I had a busted lip. That was the end of that story. All right, where was I going with this? Oh, yes. And the idea, though, is of breaking out is taking territory away from the adversary. You're marching. You're moving out. So when I was 7 years old, my dad, the one that drove me to the fight, he also drove me to a movie, and it was Patton. And it was it was an experience I will never forget, because at the beginning of the movie Patton, George C. Scott walks out and he's decked out in his uniform and all the medals, and he's got his ivory-handled pistols on his side. You know, he's got this scowl on his face. And when he first walks out on the screen, there's this huge American flag that, when I was a kid, to me, it was just like, he's right there. He's like right at the front of the theater, and it was freaking me out. And then, of course, he goes into his monologue, and it was not G-rated, you know, but I was just enthralled. And so since then, I've just really been I've been very interested in Patton, the Third Army, and all those kinds of things. So here's where I'm going with this. there was a time when Patton was separated from those who were actually in the field fighting. They had him in England. He was being a decoy. The Germans thought he was the greatest American general, and they had him over there and running around making speeches, and the Germans were focused on Patton. All the while, they were building this big invasion force to go into Europe. So D-Day came, and there were initial victories, but then they got into French hedgerow country, and they got bogged down. The invasion force more or less got bogged down. So they put George Patton in charge of the Third Army. He and Omar Bradley have a conference, and Bradley is telling Patton, we have got to break out. And so they concentrated forces under Patton's Third Army in hedgerow country. They penetrated the German lines. They made a little breach in the lines, but as they made this breach, then more forces behind them lent weight to it, and they began to break out. And when they broke out of hedgerow country, the Allied forces began to spread out all across Europe and eventually brought the demise of the German army. What's the point? The breakout. Sometimes we are separated. Sometimes we are divided. Sometimes we're put over here and we feel like we're not doing anything. But all of that is to bring us to the place where we see that if we're going to overcome, if we're going to be victorious, if his purposes are going to be served, that we have to break out. So the harpazo, holding on to or snatching, okay, is also tied to the idea of paratz, which is this energy. It builds and builds and builds and builds, and then it breaks out. And once it breaks out, it opens the door for others to break out too. So that in relation to Matthew 11, tying that to this whole Jacob Esau thing. What is the prophecy in Genesis 25 related to the two? They're both going to kind of, go back and forth with one another. But in the end, the older one will serve the younger one. And so it was always intended that Jacob, Israel, overcome, put his heel, as it were, on the head of Esau. But in order to do that, we have to break out. We have to break out from being lethargic, apathetic, having an isolationist mentality that I can't engage those people because they don't think the way I do, they don't dress the way I do. Not that we want to be like them, to compromise with them, coexist with them, but yet we have to break out because our goal, our mission is to take territory away from the adversary. That same chapter, let me pull it up on my phone here. I hope I'm not getting too wordy today. All right, it came to pass when Yeshua had made an end of commanding his 12 disciples, he departed from there to teach and preach in their cities. Now, when John had heard in the prison the works of Messiah, he sent two of his disciples, said to him, are you the one that should come, or should we look for another? Yeshua answered and said unto them, go and show John again those things which you do hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, the poor have the gospel preached to them, and blessed is he who shall not be offended in me. And then that's when he goes into, what did you go out in the wilderness to see? And then that leads him to, to say that from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, but is breaking out. Now, what was the indication that the kingdom of heaven was breaking out? The blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the poor have the gospel preached to them. What does that infer? Engaging people. And as people are hearing the gospel, as the lame are healed, as the blind are healed, what's happening? The oppressed, those who are in captivity, those who are in bondage are being liberated. Well, who's the liberating force? We are. We're the army. Okay, now he's the commander-in-chief, as it were. He's the captain of the Lord's host, is the way he introduced himself to Joshua. He's over it all, but who is he doing it in and through? He's doing it through his people. So the body is supposed to function in at least some ways as a military force, in the sense that we are to take ground away from the adversary. We are to liberate those who are in captivity. We are to march against the gates of hell. And if we're standing on what is true, what is sure, that foundation, that rock, that Yeshua is the Messiah and the Son of the living God, what does he say? The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The gates don't come to us, we go to the gates. That, again, is implying marching, moving, advancing. And the snatch, the energy that's in that, in Hebrew is tied to the idea of breaking out from this lethargic state, breaking out of being stagnant and get on the move. Anyway, I'm getting preachy. Jane here, okay.
So much of what you're saying is what I'm hearing, and Lord brought the scripture to mind: when the enemy comes in like a flood, he raises up a standard against him. And going back to Genesis and Jacob, a key note here was his silence. He heard about Diana, and Jacob held his peace until the sons came. And then also, it was the sons that spoke and not the father. So this element of silence was something that just was highlighted to me. And because in these last days, because we're in 5780, which is 10 years of pay, which has to do with our mouth, is so important that we overcome through the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And that silence, for the body of Christ to be silent, is unacceptable at this time, because the truth needs to be brought out. We need to reverse what we're seeing with the truth of God's word and God's will. I was listening to another messianic leader in the body who lives in an area where people have been, even though the congregation is very generous and serves the community, surrounding community in Israel with financial support and charity and so forth, and it is a Christian house, the community is speaking that they are a cult. And so because of what's just happened, because of the anti-Semitism that has been kicking up, and apparently the Lord was impressing him, it was time to begin revealing who they really are to the community, which they're going to be putting up a sign showing who they are, saying we're a Christian community, getting into radio and more media and so on and so forth, educating the community, opposing, instead of remaining silent and allowing this to rise. Because one of the things that he said in relationship to the Holocaust is that the Christians, there was plenty of evidence that was rising, that this was coming, but the Christian community was silent, and the Jews were not asking for help. And so it's just very important in these last days that we do not hold our peace, that we abide in peace, that we reside in peace, but we speak the truth in love in his peace, so that we can, that peace cannot remain silent. It must be voiced, because it is peace that crushes the head of the enemy. And so that's what I wanted to share.
Okay. Well, I see two perspectives on this. I mean, where Jacob was holding his peace. Sometimes I do think that, well, there are times to speak and there are times to be silent, And I think we have to be really sensitive to, his voice and his spirit, which is which. When is it time to be silent? When is it time to speak? I go back to something that we've noted about Jacob from the beginning, is being a temperate man. He does not allow his emotions to rule him. He rules over his emotions, So when it says that he held his peace, again, I don't quite understand, that in the circumstance there. But yet when he addresses his sons and he says, and what they have done and what they have created, it might be because of how they went about it. And I guess what I'm trying to say there is it would be easy for any of us in something like that to lose our cool, not hold our peace, and then react out of anger. I can't remember one time that I've ever done anything when I was angry that later on I thought, wow, that was the smartest thing I've ever done. It's when I'm angry. It's when I'm angry that I act out of emotion, and I understand there's righteous anger too. But when I'm angry and I'm allowing my emotions to rule, sometimes I do the wrong thing. I say the wrong thing. I behave a certain way, and so there is and this is my point. There is value in knowing when to hold your peace, and at the same time, there is that time that comes that we are not supposed to be quiet anymore. One of the most important songs in my life, and I know that sounds nuts, but it's taken from Isaiah 62. And that song, heard in Hebrew so many years ago, turned my life around. And the essence of that song, or from Isaiah 62, is, for the sake of Zion, I will not keep silent. For the sake of Jerusalem, I will not hold my peace. And so when it comes to what he's doing in the earth, his purposes, and when it comes time for those things to break out and for his purposes to advance, then yes, we don't hold our peace. We speak up. We let our voices be heard. Because one of the things that the adversary has wanted to do from the beginning, even to now, is he wants to silence us. The Targum of Onkelos, which is an Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Scripture, translates Genesis chapter 2 when it says, when God breathed the breath of life into man, he became a living being. It translates it as, and became a speaking spirit. So what does the adversary want to do? He wants to silence those that are his people. So hope you understand what I'm saying. There's merit to holding our peace and knowing when to hold our peace, and then to know when to refuse to be silent. So I agree with you that we are living in a day and time that the people of God don't need to be off in the corner somewhere, intimidated, and for whatever reason, we keep silent about those things that are true, those things that are his purposes. John the Baptist came on the scene after what's called the 400 years of silence. 400 years since the people of God had heard a direct word from God. So after 400 years of silence, what does he do? He comes on the scene. He opens up his mouth, as you pointed out. He came in the spirit and the power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children to the fathers, right? So he comes on the scene, and what does he say? Repent, the kingdom of heaven's at hand. I believe that that's the message now. Repent, the kingdom of heaven's at hand. So in that, I do believe that we need to speak up. We do not need to be intimidated into silence, okay? And then there are those times when we're faced with situations whereby our emotions could get the best of us, justified or not. There is value in knowing when to hold your peace until you can gain control over those emotions, right? I don't know who's next. Dale, if you'll find who's next, let me read one here. Is it possible that Jacob was trying to give Esau a bit of what he stole from his material blessings, but he retained the covenant blessing given to Jacob? First of all, I'm not of the opinion that Jacob stole anything. He obtained the birthright because he said, sell me your birthright. Esau agreed to that. He went into his father pretending to be Esau in order to gain the blessing at the behest of his mother, who compelled him to do this. He even said, I do not want to be found to be a deceiver. And we talked about this a couple of weekends ago. I'm just not of the opinion that Jacob stole anything. I don't see it that way. Now, in his mind, was he thinking, well, I'll send this and I'll give that as a way of maybe placating, some of Esau's emotions? I don't know. It doesn't come across that way to me in the text. It just seems that being fearful of what he's going to do with these 400 men, it's just, I'm going to give of some of my abundance. I'm going to give it to him and see if that soft answer turns away wrath. But by the way, what does Esau respond? I don't need it. I got plenty. I don't need your flocks and herds. I've been blessed too. I don't know. There's some of these things that we just, in this life, on this side of things, we'll never know exactly what somebody was thinking. Who's next here? All right, Robert.
Okay, forgive me, but I'm going to go back to Candace's question because I'm thinking about it as whether you're a father or you're in some kind of supervisor or managerial position in business, or you're the leader of a congregation, whoever is, quote unquote, in charge, I think, sidebar, I think a lot of times in charge just means the person that everything gets thrown at, but you get
that stuff you were telling me earlier about.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So you get a lot of motivation and intent and purpose assigned to whatever you decide or whatever you do that may or may not be there. But as the leader, you're just moving forward with what you see in the bigger picture as more relevant and more important. And the reason I say that is a precursor, because I think sometimes in this story, we see the father not taking action and almost assign other things behind the reason he's not taking, whether it's fear, whether it's misdirection, whether it's not caring about his daughter, whatever. We assign a lot of stuff there that I'm not sure that it's there, because what his sons did, and when I read it, what I see that his sons did is they took a covenantal relationship with the Almighty and they used that to bring about death. That covenantal relationship is meant to bring life. And that covenantal relationship, when entered upon, means everything preceding has been forgiven. You are now my child. Nothing before matters. So you have no right to kill them at that point. You, encouraging them to enter that covenantal relationship, have exonerated their sin. That's just my thoughts on it, that maybe that's where the dad was coming from, is you have twisted, and that's a tool of the enemy, the adversary, but you have twisted what should have been freely, not coerced into entering into this relationship, but it was a way to enter into a relationship with the Most High and become as one with us, and you twisted that for your own devices, and that makes you worse than the adversary.
Well, I mean, I had not thought of it exactly that way, but that kind of goes hand in glove with what I was saying, is that, Jacob, I don't think that it's necessarily he's unconcerned about what has happened to his daughter as much as it is that his sons have behaved in such an unhonorable way or dishonorable way. And, that adds another layer to it, that they've taken something that should be considered sacred and holy, and then they have profaned it, more or less, is what they have done. And, as you said, to render death. So they were, in their own way, just as, manipulative, deceitful, and all those other things. And by the way, he separated them in Israel. You two need to be split up, because it's not good when you get, you two guys get together, and it remains that way. So excellent point. Thank you. Who's got the microphone? Okay. William?
It brought to Miles to happen. And he really kind of steps back and looks how each person involved is going to respond. In the pagan nation that when they weren't doing, what God was wanting them to do. And then God turned around and punished them. I was trying to find that reference.
I think it's referring to Babylon, actually. He called Nebuchadnezzar my servant. He raised him up as a rod of correction. But then he turned around and punished Babylon because of the atrocities that they had committed. Yeah. Anyway, continue.
So anyway, I was just thinking that God is not unaware of bad, and he sees it all. Good. And he might not act as swiftly.
I'm trying to remember if it was last week or the week before, but at some point we were talking about the fact that he observes us. I wouldn't say that he orchestrates necessarily, but he certainly, anything that happens to us or that we, becomes part of our lives, it's either something that the adversary's orchestrated, it's something that the Creator has orchestrated, and this is what I think most of it is the consequence of our own choices and actions. And then he allows the consequences to become a teacher, to become a tutor, for if we have to endure the consequences and live with it, perhaps the sting of that will teach us don't do that again. So, but whatever category it falls under, he obviously knows and he obviously observes, and I agree with you. Sometimes he doesn't get involved the way we'd like for him to, when we'd like for him to, how we'd like for him to, but he observes how we're going to respond. And it's like Jacob. He let Laban do all those things to him. He let him oppress him. He let him accuse him. He let him misuse him, he let him deceive him. He let all those things happen. But then, and this is what I believe, it's because he wanted to see how he was going to respond, and is he going to live up to that name, that call of being Israel. So it is with us. He does allow those things. Back to Jacob and Dina and that whole thing. Would Jacob have been justified in wiping everybody out that, abused his daughter? In my mind, absolutely. Yeah. But something he said here, maybe Jacob had to look at the big picture. And he was looking at what his two sons had done and how they had dishonored not their sister, but their Creator. And so which carries more weight with it, and maybe that's what he's focusing on there. He's trying to look at the big picture of, that was wrong, but what you did was you took something holy and you profaned it. You used it to deceive and to render death. So, do what? Yeah, right. So, which then prompts this in my mind, and it's not really related to our topic today, but I still wonder if when Aaron and his sons were given the priesthood, was it a reward or was it a consequence? All right, who was next? Okay. Yes, Marlene.
Okay. This kind of ties with what everybody says. When you were saying about when right before, we don't know how long things are in between each other in the Bible, but, we were talking about Jacob, and he, wrestled with God, and he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. And I think it's possibly he did that because he knew that whatever God blesses, nobody else can curse. So here we have the Dina incident, and Jacob, now he knows this. God has blessed him. So I agree, with Robert in what you said, because this was the first year I read that I thought, you know what? Jacob knew that he was blessed. And during all this, the reading of Jacob and Esau, I've been thinking about Esther. And even what we said today about, you were talking about the two sticks coming together and everything, and about the West and Joseph and that. And I think about us, the Jewish people have been very, everybody knew who the Jewish people were. But I remember when the Lord said to Elijah, I have 7,000 people you knew not of. And I always wondered if he meant, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And so what I'm thinking about that is like, we're all like Esther's. And we're over here and we're, we're grabbing onto Torah. And I don't know if they recognize us yet. But as Esther's, there was a timing when you said about timing. And that's what I wondered what Jacob was, Jacob was thinking. He was thinking about the timing because he knew that God wouldn't let that go. So, in situations that I've been in where I felt like I wanted to rush in and with revenge or avenge, it's almost like he's saying, well, Haman's not finished building the gallows. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of times we rush in and we don't have the result that we would have because I believe that Haman is still building the gallows and we have to wait for the enemy to get done building those gallows because the Father's going to hang them on it.
Because he's building for them, right?
Exactly. And so we have to be very, very discerning on our timing as Esther's to rise up and really, start speaking because it just may not be that time yet. But when it comes that time, I myself have been in a situation where I've been waiting on a timing, and it just has seemed like it's okay. Something else will happen, or something else will happen, and I'm thinking, it'll make me mad, and I'll think, I'm gonna call this person. I'm gonna, what I'm saying, but I just feel like that word is like, be as an Esther. Wait until the gallows are done.
Hold your peace.
When it's time, he's not going to give me peace because it's time to go in, but don't do it ahead of time. And that's what I think about the Dina incident.
Well, just to bolster that point, in Genesis 15, I think it was, when Abraham was like, you haven't given me an heir, I don't want this Damascus guy to be my heir, it looks like that's the way it's going to be, in that conversation. And then he begins to tell him what's going to become of your descendants and how they're going to go and serve this other nation. But he said this, because the cup of the Amorites is not yet full. Okay? So that, to add to your argument there, if the cup of the Amorites was not yet full in Genesis 15, who's to say it wasn't full in Genesis chapter 33 and 4, too? Because when do we see evidence that the cup of the Amorites was full and it was time for it to be addressed? So when the children of Israel under Joshua's leadership come back into the land and they start conquering the land, start possessing the land in that right. So, timing is everything. And something else that comes to mind, and it may not seem connected to you guys, but it seems relevant to me. At the end of his life, when Jacob is blessing all of his children, I think it's Dan, he makes this statement, I wait for your salvation, O Lord. So he's saying, I am waiting for your salvation. In fact, Yeshuati is the term. So that to me perhaps connects to what you're saying here, that here's a man that, again, seems anyway, he does not allow his emotions to rule him, but he has learned to be a temperate man and to rule over his emotions. Now, I would say that in our own abilities, that's going to be very difficult to do. But if we are someone who is desirous to be upright before him, if we're going to be full of the Spirit of God, then the Spirit of God can help us in all our infirmities, we're told, in all of our weaknesses. He helps us. And I would include, not allowing my emotions to get out of control, that I overreact, I rush in, I do something prematurely and undo or derail what the Father has intended to bring about. So Jacob says, I am waiting for your salvation. So just, a thought. And by the way, about the 7,000, remember Yeshua said to his disciples, I have a flock that you don't know about. Remember? Okay. Dale, you get the next one lined up for me. I'm going to read one off the board here from the live stream. Is it possible that when Jacob was wrestling with the angel, that this was the time he stepped into the authority blessing he had obtained from Isaac years before? In the sense that the blessing is this: he's called Israel. That's the blessing. To be called Israel is a blessing if we're walking in what it means to be Israel. There's a blessing. Because if we're walking in what it means to be Israel, then we're walking upright before El. We're walking Yashar, before the Creator. And when we're walking in His Word and being obedient to Him, there is an inherent blessing in obedience. So when he obtained the blessing from Isaac, I would say that to walk as Israel would be the fruition of that, which then, if that's the case, then you and I could see ourselves as also having obtained the blessing from Isaac, in the sense that he has allowed us to come in to become part of this family that's called Israel. Anyway, yes.
My question is going to put all of us together, but it's kind of controversial. So,
so your question is going to put it all together?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, just making sure.
So this is like something that Dina was saying about what you were saying, Peretz and Harpazo, and the whole timing thing and all that. Now, when this Hebrew roots, looking at the way of looking things, it really takes my growing up and kind of turning it on its head.
Yeah, you're the only one.
All of my life, I've been taught that Christians are very polite, and I'm thinking polis from what you wrote down in politics, the word polite. You're polite. You kind of hold your tongue. You don't do anything out of stride. You're just this kind of a person. That's what a Christian is, someone who's really polite. But then Peretz means you kind of break out of the bondage of other things. But at the same time, the harpazo, the idea that we're going to be snatched away has always been in me, that there's a pre-tribulation rapture. But the more I sit under this, I realize that that's probably not true. And that the harpazo is not like we're being snatched away, but we're breaking out to help with so people can, come to know the Lord. Am I seeing this like differently?
Well, you just told me you're seeing it differently. All right. I have said things from time to time to time, and if you were paying attention, you would have caught it. See, if Messiah were to come before anything bad happens and snatch us all away, I'm good with that. Okay? Now, is that what I'm expecting to happen? No, I'm not. He delivers us, but I've never seen the pattern of, we are removed from the world, because how does he work in the world? Through us. All right. So when all of the plagues were being poured out on Egypt, where was Israel? Right in the smack dab middle of it, right? But when darkness was upon Egypt, what was going on in Goshen? It was light. Arise, shine, for your light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. Darkness will be upon the nations, deep darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory shall be seen upon you. Kings will be drawn to the brightness of your rising. So if the Creator has, from the very beginning, chosen in his wisdom to work in and through people, I find it fundamentally errant for him to all of a sudden change his mind, pull out those that he works in and through in human history's darkest day. Okay, so I don't see it that way. Now, again, let me this is not one of the pillars of my faith, okay? As far as timing on things, when he does it is up to him. And if he wants to do it for anything bad happens, groovy. I'm not counting on it, though, okay? And here, I know. Here's what I think happens. This snatching, the harpazo that you're talking about, some people have thought it this way. I see it this way. We talked about this a little bit last week, too. The breaking out. Some people think we're going to break out like this. I see it as we're breaking out like this. Some people see the Exodus as this. I see the Exodus as he releases his people from all the nations to come from, near and far, from the north, south, east, and west. And where is he bringing them to, according to all those prophecies? Where is he bringing them to? Cleveland. There are people in this town who think that. I'm going to have to disagree with that. No, he brings them back into the land, right? Yes. He brings them back into the land. Where is the Messiah going to rule and reign from? He's going to rule and reign from Jerusalem, right? All right. So Paul describes an event where the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout and the voice of the archangel and the trump of God, and the trump will sound, and those who are dead in Messiah will be caught up, and those of us who are alive and remain will caught up to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Okay, I don't think Paul was, leading us astray by describing that. I do believe that that is something that will happen. It's just that I don't believe. I don't think that that's what harpazo is supposed to be talking about there, in the sense of snatching us out. It's the sense of us breaking out. So it was a thought that went in here, it rolled around, it exited. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. That same mindset, the same doctrine, theology, whatever, that we're going to be removed from everything before anything really bad happens, right? Pre-trib rapture. I would suggest to you is predicated on this, that they're Israel and we're not. All the bad stuff happens to them. We're out of here before anything bad happens. Because it's Jacob's trouble, right? Right? That there's these two groups. God's got this one group over here called the church, and he's dealing with them a certain way. They're all grace, and they're this, and they're that, and they don't have to do anything. And he's going to remove them for anything bad happens. But all these people over here called Israel and the Jews and all this stuff, all this bad stuff's going to happen because that's Jacob's trouble, because they've got to see Yeshua is the Messiah. Okay? I'd suggest that the whole idea of being removed before anything bad happens is in large part based on that premise. However, what happens to that when you realize that when you come to Messiah, that in Messiah you're grafted into and become part of the family that's called Israel? That you're part of this family of faith that is Jacob. You're part of that family. So if all that stuff's going to happen to Jacob and you're part of Jacob, are you going to be excluded from that? My opinion, no. That doesn't mean, however, that I feel that the Creator just steps back and let everything that the adversary can throw at us, have its way. I believe that what happens in the midst of that, if we are upright before Him, if we're walking upright before Him, if we're doing what is pleasing to Him, just like the congregation of Philadelphia, He said, I see you, you're worn out, you're tired, you have a little strength, but you've kept my word, you haven't denied my name, and so I'm going to keep you, guard you, protect you from the hour of trial that is coming upon the whole world to test those who dwell upon the earth. You see, because in the midst of the darkness, there's light in Goshen. In the midst of that very hostile environment over there in the Middle East, there's a place called Israel, and a people that he says, your call is to be a light to the nations. You prepare a place for me in the presence of my, you prepare a table for me in the presence, where? Of my enemies. There's the pattern. Okay. So, I believe that what Paul describes will happen. I'm just not of the opinion that it happens when we would like for it to. Because who wants to go through anything bad? Right? Okay. So I believe that what you're starting to see is moving in the right direction. That's my strong opinion. I have very, very close friends that vehemently disagree with this. And we butt heads all the time. But let me throw this one other thought onto that. Not that it's related to your question necessarily, but there are a lot of people who we disdain and we disparage and we mock and scoff at people who've held to that view. Okay? But some of those same people are plotting how they can get out of the United States into some other foreign country where it's safe, that they can wait there until all the dust settles. And so my question is, so what's the difference in trying to escape this way and trying to escape that way? The safest place to be is exactly where you're supposed to be and where he wants you and where he's put you. And sometimes, ask Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, ask them, sometimes the best place to be is right smack dab in the middle of where you don't want to be. They were in Babylon. Where, you know how Jeremiah was saved? Because they threw him in prison. So sometimes the safest place to be is where the Father wants you to be. And if that means here on this earth, as all hell is breaking loose, he set a distinction between his people in Egypt then, so that not even a dog would raise his head against you. And if he can do it then, he's going to do it this time too. My challenge, our challenge, is to get our focus so exclusively on him and walking in that path that he set before us, that if I'm so focused on him, I don't have time to focus on the waves crashing and everything that's going on around me. Because when I get my eyes on that, what happens? I sink. Anyway, I got a little carried away with that one. But did I answer your question? Okay. All right. Who was next, Dale? All right, Jane.
Who's that? All right. Yeah, good.
I'm going to get all kinds of email now, right?
Well, I think it's interesting to, going back to the 34th chapter, going back to this element of silence, going back to a father in relationship with his sons. I wasn't questioning the wisdom of Jacob holding his peace in the forefront, but it's,
I didn't take it that you were.
Okay, so but on the backside, it's curious that it was the sons that spoke up first, at least what is recorded. And Abraham was selected because he would teach his sons. And I think it's relevant to see that when did this happen, but right when, just after he had erected an altar to the Lord, had purchased property in the land that had been promised, Satan came immediately after he had erected an altar and called it El-Ho, Israel, God, the God of Israel, in Genesis 33:20. And so I see a pattern.
I'm listening.
They were part of the promise that God had given him of possessing the land was fulfilled in a measure, and immediately Satan came to steal that. And just thinking in terms of silence and the pattern between Adam and Eve and how Satan came in the garden. So could there not be some kind of connection in this element of silence, how important it is, one, to teach our children and to maintain that, the right alignment in households as far as authorities, and again, getting to the male, where Adam he'd spoken up when Eve had been deceived. And I understand there's emotions, and it was just such a horrible act. But I'm seeing some kind of a connection between that, because they would just set into that area of the land.
Well, I see your point as far as them going to Bethel and keeping the vow and raising up the altar there, etc. Elohe Israel. It's God, the God of Israel, but more or less, is what that was saying. As far as the sons speaking up, the father holding his peace, the idea of teaching your children.
Yeah, on the 13th. So, I mean, you see the leadership. He was in. The timing was critical. They had just come to a place. He had just gotten a victory. He had purchased the land. He had part of the promise. They were surrounded by, another culture. This happened, yet the Lord, in His blessing, there was a blessing in it, in that they were seeking to make it right and willing to accept the covenant. And
I don't know. I'm gonna have to go back and just reread it and just meditate on it.
just seeing a pattern between Adam and his silence and this father's silence, maybe with his sons.
I don't know. I want to defer to my saying that if you don't want a fly to get in your mouth, you keep it shut. So for now, I'll hold my peace.
Okie dokie.